We took a look at the data, selected the clips you watched the most, and put them together into this list. Antonio was driving down the interstate when a dump truck performed a pit maneuver on his Nissan Sentra. His car spun completely around, and the driver of a Mazda Miata was unable to avoid hitting him in the process. Incredibly, the truck driver then drove off, making this a hit and run. His dashcam didn't capture the truck's license plate number, but it did get the name of the trucking company, CL Parker Trucking. Unfortunately, Antonio hasn't had any luck getting a hold of the company. Brian was driving through a construction zone on an interstate highway. As he entered an area with concrete barriers on both sides and nothing resembling a shoulder, traffic suddenly slowed way down. Brian slowed down safely, and so did the Kia driver behind him, but the driver of a Nissan SUV wasn't paying attention and slammed into the Kia, pushing it into Brian's Jeep as well. Brian had tried to make room in case something like this happened, but it wasn't enough to completely avoid the collision. Thankfully, he was able to avoid hitting the next car, and his steel bumper wasn't damaged. Thankfully, nobody was injured in the collision. Brian left after checking on the other drivers, but he has no idea how they went about cleaning up the accident, unless a tow truck drove backward down the highway to reach it. ID John was headed home from work in his VW ID4 and had just entered the carpool lane. Suddenly, he watched an oncoming pickup truck collide with a BMW before hitting the median barrier and being sent tumbling. ID John was worried the truck might flip over the barrier, but it did its job and kept the truck on the correct side of the highway. The pickup ended up completely on its roof in the middle lane of the highway. ID John circled back to the accident scene to offer his dashcam footage, and first responders were already cleaning up the wrecked truck. A pickup driver failed to secure his U-Haul trailer, and it came off the hitch while he was driving down the highway. Eventually, the safety chains failed, and the trailer was sent rolling into the median barrier before flipping over. Thankfully, the trailer was completely empty. Melissa was driving to work when her Subaru Crosstrek was rear-ended by the driver of an Infiniti who wasn't paying attention. Melissa's car immediately began notifying emergency services. She then called her fiancé Matt, and he was actually watching a helicopter shot of the accident scene when she called him. Melissa attached the dashcam footage to her insurance claim, and the insurance company paid for her totaled Subaru as well as her medical bills. Losing the Subaru she'd just gotten was upsetting, but Matt was able to find her a replacement and is just glad her injuries weren't any more serious. James was on his way to school with 4 passengers on a bright, sunny New York day. Suddenly, the driver of a Honda Civic pulled in front of his Chevy Malibu.
Are you f***ing serious?
The impact was so hard, the Honda was pushed into a Toyota Sienna, making this a 3-car accident. James had been honking his horn when the impact occurred, and the airbag broke his wrist when it went off. The Honda driver was cited for failing to signal. James has no idea why the Honda driver didn't see him, but he assumes the guy was on his phone. Here's a cool clip. This submitter has a camera mounted to his bicycle. He was on his way to school when he witnessed a car accident right in front of him. The driver of a Mercedes ran a yield sign and smashed into a Volvo with the right-of-way. Fortunately, the police were following right behind the Volvo, and the officers immediately stopped to render aid. Firefighters arrived quickly after, but there were no serious injuries. Our submitter gave the police a copy of his footage, for which they were grateful. Paolo was driving his Subaru when the driver of an Alfa Romeo failed to yield and turned in front of him at an intersection. Paolo hit the brakes and swerved as soon as he noticed the SUV turning in front of him, but he slid into it anyway. Even though he was later diagnosed with a concussion, he managed to call 911. He also received whiplash, and his Subaru was totaled in the impact. His airbags deployed, and he was taken to the emergency room to be x-rayed. Fortunately, no fractures were found. He wanted to thank the Markham Fire Department, York Region Paramedic Services, and the York Regional Police for responding to the scene, and the staff of the Markham Stouffville Hospital for ensuring he was taken care of. Fobbitz was driving his Ford E-Series van when a tow truck lost the U-Haul truck it was pulling, sending it hurtling across the street backwards. The truck hit a car after Fobbitz braked to avoid it. The driver was taken away by an ambulance in under 15 minutes. Fobbitz gave a copy of his dashcam footage to the responding officer. It's true what they say. You really have to watch out for those driverless vehicles. Chris was on his way home from a job interview when his Kia Rio was suddenly rear-ended by a pickup truck. It doesn't look like the pickup driver even tried to slow down until the last second. Chris managed to keep his car in his own lane, but the pickup veered off into a ditch. Both vehicles were totaled. The pickup driver's insurance provider only paid for a rental car for Chris for a week, and his attorneys are now negotiating with them for a larger settlement. Unfortunately, this caused him to lose his pizza delivery job because he didn't have a car, and the restaurant's new management accused him of failing to communicate even though he told them about what had happened. Remember when I mentioned Chris had been heading home from a job interview? At his new job, he deals with no food, no customers, and he gets his own company vehicle. He sent along a shout out for his old manager Bean, who did a great job running the pizza restaurant until the new management came along and fudged it all up. This submitter was headed home one snowy night. As he was transitioning from one highway to another, he noticed snowplows backing up traffic and figured he could squeeze by them. At the moment he was attempting to pass the snowplows, they moved to the right without signaling, surprising our submitter. When he swerved to avoid hitting the blade, the snow caused him to lose control. His Subaru Impreza slammed into the plow blade, ripping off the side view mirror, wrecking the driver's side door, and leaving yellow paint down the side of the car. Our submitter admits this accident was his own fault, and he knows he should have slowed down and merged behind the snowplows, so be gentle in the comments. He shared this clip hoping others will learn from his mistake. Fortunately, his no-fault insurance policy paid for his repairs anyway, which cost over $4,000 US. Ricardo was asleep at 2 a.m. and his neighbor came and woke him up after this happened. The drunk driver of a red Jeep smashed into Ricardo's Volkswagen after hitting another car parked behind him. This obliterated a front wheel, but that wasn't enough to stop the Jeep driver. After backing up, the drunk driver hit Ricardo's car a couple more times before smashing into a white Mazda parked ahead of him on the street. Bystanders put themselves in harm's way trying to stop the drunk driver, but he took off again, smashing into no fewer than 3 more cars before finally stopping. Eventually, the Jeep became immobilized. Police arrived, and the driver was taken to a hospital for minor injuries. His insurance policy couldn't cover the over $35,000 US in damage done, with $9,500 of that being done to Ricardo's Jetta. Ricardo had to use his own insurance policy to cover the damage to his car, and the drunk driver's insurance policy only paid for his deductible. Cole was headed to work, and he admits he was speeding about 10 miles per hour over the limit. Suddenly, a pickup truck hidden by the glare of oncoming headlights pulled onto the road in front of him. Cole had no chance to stop, T-boning the pickup truck. His rare Saturn Ion Redline was sent rolling, finally coming to rest on its roof. Unsurprisingly, it was totaled. Cole had to have surgery for a broken wrist and says he's lucky to be alive. Amazingly, he told us the pickup driver's insurance provider is blaming him for the accident and refusing to pay for his claim. He wants to know who you think is at fault and if he should hire an attorney to sue the insurance company. He also wanted to shout out his family for supporting him through this ordeal. Anthony had just left a car meet at a local university. As he was waiting in an intersection notorious for accidents, he watched another driver pay the price for running a red light.
Oh.
It looks like the red light runner wasn't paying attention and assumed their own light had turned green when the traffic next to them started moving. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Anthony stopped to render first aid, which he's certified to do, until first responders arrived minutes later. The Acura driver was okay, but the Volkswagen driver was transported to a hospital to be treated for whiplash. Anthony says to please be careful while driving. These drivers are lucky the accident wasn't any worse. Kalos was approaching a red light in his Toyota Corolla. When the light turned green, he began accelerating, but the driver of a Kia Telluride decided to make an unprotected left turn in front of him. Kalos couldn't avoid a collision even though he applied the brakes. The Kia driver then took off, leaving him confused. His Corolla, which was decorated for Halloween, was totaled, and he and his passenger were both injured. The Kia driver was later caught and arrested for DUI and hit and run. Kalos is still waiting to get a settlement for his totaled car. Alexander was heading to his parents' house in his pickup truck to help them move. When a van driver brake checked him, he swerved to avoid it before speeding up to beat a yellow light. An oncoming driver in the turn lane didn't see Alexander and turned, T-boning his pickup and sending it into a light pole before rolling over. His truck was totaled in the impact. The other driver was found to be at fault, and his insurance provider paid for Alexander's truck. The accident was so severe that it was even covered by the local news.
One man was taken to the hospital after a crash at 52nd Avenue South and 45th Street South in Fargo. Officers on the scene tell us the pickup was struck by the car at the intersection. They describe the pickup driver's injuries as non-life-threatening despite the massive damage to the vehicle, and they say the driver of the car was not hurt.
However, traffic was slowed for more than an hour as crews worked to get that pickup onto another truck.
Want to know how this happened? Buckle up, we're about to find out. Mario was on his way to pick up his daughter from kindergarten. A young woman driving a Lexus T-boned Mario's Kia Rio at 60 miles per hour, sending it rolling 60 feet before landing on top of a parked Toyota Corolla. Along the way, it hit a traffic signal as well. All three vehicles were totaled. The other driver said she'd been looking at a map on her phone and hadn't seen Mario. He sustained neck and back injuries, but he said he's lucky to be alive and he's glad this happened before picking up his daughter. Jeremy's dad was driving along in his Toyota Highlander. The driver of a white pickup truck was driving distracted, interpret that how you will, before traffic ahead of them came to a stop. The white pickup smashed into the pickup in front of it, pushing it into another pickup, which was then pushed into a sedan. In total, 4 vehicles were involved in this fender bender. Simon was headed home from work when a Porsche came flying up behind his Audi Q3. The Porsche driver tried to blame the sun for blinding her, but that doesn't explain why she was driving so fast. Simon has moderate whiplash and both vehicles were totaled. A few minutes after the crash, her mother and friends showed up with a tow truck and tried to quickly get Simon's info so they could leave. Simon knew something wasn't right, so he made them wait for the police, and they were not happy. When the cops arrived, they gave the driver of the Porsche a breathalyzer test. We don't know what the results were, but we do know that she was immediately arrested. Simon wanted to shout out everyone who stopped to help, especially an off-duty cop who kept him from having a panic attack. He also said he's thinking about replacing his Audi with a Tesla. Michaela was driving her Volkswagen Golf down a highway in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Watch what happened when a pickup driver swerved without checking his blind spot to avoid a car that had stopped. The pickup cut off a minivan, and the driver had no chance to stop before hitting the back of the pickup. While the minivan rolled over, the pickup spun into Michaela's lane and she hit it head-on. Incredibly, there were no serious injuries. Unfortunately, all 3 vehicles involved were totaled.